welcome to Football League World TV. My name is Ned Holmes, and this is the West Brom fan debate. Today, I'm joined by Matt from West Brom Report to discuss the Baggies' January transfer window so far and assess what needs to happen before the end of the month. How are you doing, Matt? Perhaps a little bit disappointed after sort of last night.
Of course, mate. Yeah, it wasn't a great evening for everyone associated with the club, and it's difficult to see really where we go from there. But you're right, yeah, not over the moon for sure.
Absolutely. We'll crack on it and get stuck into some transfer stuff because there is plenty to talk about before we get started. Just a reminder to give this video a like, subscribe to Football League World TV on YouTube, and do let us know your thoughts in the comments, whether you're an EFL fan or a fan of the Baggies. Let us know how you feel West Brom have got on this month and what else they need to do. I guess to kick things off then, Matt, I want to get your general thoughts on the transfer window so far. You know, what were your expectations heading into it, and has it lived up to them?
I mean, I think traditionally Albion have left business in January rather late, and you sort of ensure that your hopes don't get too carried away, and you think, well, you have your ideal window, but it very rarely actually comes to fruition. Yeah. However, I think everyone who's watched West Brom play this season recognised we needed a striker. Jordan Hugo obviously hasn't cut it, and really we've lacked that sort of focal point to our attack. The main target, I think everyone again could recognise from his time with Barnsley last year. The connection was there with the manager. The target was Daryl DK, and as I said, though, we usually leave everything ever so late, or if anything, we sometimes just fail to do any business in January, and even if we do, it's rather poor. So to see him actually on New Year's Day rock up and it's all announced on a permanent deal, it was almost like a dream. Sort of that's a pinch me moment. So it was probably beyond my expectations, if I'm honest with you, mate.
Sure, yeah. It must have eased the hangovers of sort of plenty of Baggies fans to see Daryl DK announced. That's obviously the forward you're talking about. We'll move on to him then. I mean, as you say, obviously you starred for Barnsley last year under Valerian Ishmael. I think it was 9 goals in 17 appearances, and he was linked with some big Premier League clubs, but West Brom have signed him sort of on a permanent. You've got to be excited about that bit of business despite the injury.
Yeah, massively. I mean, I think any sort of report or rumour that you would have seen prior to the signing being announced claimed it was a loan to buy deal on the basis that we were promoted to the Premier League at the end of the season. Really reliable journalists came out with that statement. So again, when you see them announced on a 4-year contract, I believe it is, permanent deal, it was wow, brilliant news. I mean, for £7 million, I think it's reported to be. You can't go wrong with a deal like that. As you said, he impressed under Ishmael at Barnsley, and then scored a few in the MLS with Orlando as well. So yeah, brilliant to see the deal, a permanent one, and just to get it over the line, as mentioned, was a massive bonus. Shame about the injury, but I suppose you could say, well, in hindsight, if we'd signed him on loan, we'd be missing a really lengthy spell. Whereas now we've got him on a permanent deal. I suppose in the grand scheme of things, it's a small period at the next 4 years.
Absolutely, I think it's 8 weeks from the start of the injury and 11 games, including, of course, the defeat to Preston last night, that he's expected to be out for. Unfortunately, sort of as we touched upon, that injury does. Well, it doesn't take away, as you say, from what is a phenomenal signing. Given he's still so young, it does almost leave Albion sort of back at square one. One player that I think we'll touch on, perhaps expected to be moved on, given things didn't work out for him, is Jordan Hugo. 1 goal in 20 appearances. He always looked like a bit of an afterthought signing in the summer, on loan from Norwich, of course. There's been links to Hull and Millwall, and a lot of talk from the Norwich end about recalls and whether that will happen. I just wanted to get your thoughts on Hugo, Matt. Given DK's injury, rather, do you see is there a role for him now, or would you still sort of expect him perhaps to depart?
I mean, I think you could be looking at 2 scenarios here. depending on whether Valérien Ishmael is still Albion manager come the end of the window. If he is still in charge, I don't see any way back for Jordan Hugo. I think he's sort of had his chance, if this makes sense, and he's failed to impress the manager. And if he does depart, though, if Valérien Ishmael is given the boot, then you can't really predict the future, can you? Because there might be a manager who comes in and takes to him. So it's on a bit of a knife edge, I suppose, at the moment, with last night's result taken into account. The thing I always think when looking back at the signing of Jordan Hugo is, I mean, both me and you would have recognised that he's a championship level striker, perhaps a mid-table bottom half striker, put a shift in, but perhaps lacks quality in technical areas such as finishing, for example. And therefore, I question why he was signed in the first place. Albion clearly needed a goal scorer, and we signed a striker who's not exactly known for his scoring of goals. So we signed an average championship player. So I'm not too sure why fans and I suppose even management are too surprised that he hasn't really performed to a great level. He's sort of always been like this, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you talked about an interesting topic there, I guess, particularly off the back of last night, and that's the manager's future. I think we'll sort of touch on that just before we go. But moving on to sort of other options, as it were, with Albion said to be sort of scrambling around to find that striker replacement. Andy Carroll, after an impressive loan spell at Reading, has to be said. It said he's open to joining Albion. Just to get your thoughts on him, would you see him as a good stopgap, short-term option, or would you prefer to stay clear of him?
Well, I think Andy Carroll's always maybe not controversial, but he's always a topic which people enjoy talking about. And I mean, you're right, Ned. Carroll really performed for Reading, and I think it took me by surprise. Obviously, he's been out of the game for a while, injuries, and everyone knows about Andy Carroll. But I think, again, one thing you can never deny is when he is fit and he's performing well, there won't be too many better strikers at this level. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
However, again, is he the right fit for Albion? Let's go with the scenario that Ishmael remains in charge. I don't think Carroll has the mobility to suit the system which is currently in place.
Sure.
However, if you're looking for someone to get on the end of crosses and just score goals generally, you can't really look much further on a free transfer. Someone who's probably not going to demand massive money, and that's something I think the Albion board will definitely look at as a positive. I'm not sure I'd be totally against seeing Andy Carroll join if needs must, but equally I don't think he'd be top of my list.
Well, I think that's fair enough. Yeah, I completely buy into that. It's an interesting one with Carroll, given, as you say, there's probably, when he's really on song, there's few better people that you'd want when you're pumping balls into the box, which Albion have found themselves doing sort of particularly late in games. But does he have that dynamism to really lead the line? It could be, I guess, in an ideal scenario, you bring in Andy Carroll, perhaps a younger striker on loan, but then we're looking at two players in. It's a really difficult one. Another player, Middlesbrough forward, Uche Piazzu, another one linked. He's someone that Chris Wilder looking to get out of the club there. Is that a player on a move that you'd be interested in?
I mean, I think he impressed with Wickham, didn't he, last year? And I hadn't really heard too much of Piazzu prior to that. However, he hasn't exactly set the world alight with Middlesbrough, has he? And that was his big move. That was his chance to, again, kick on. Probably not the pedigree of striker we're looking at. I'd probably class that as a bit of a sideways move from Jordan Hugo, perhaps not an upgrade. Again, you'd probably say it's a viable option if you're looking from a cost-effective point of view.
Yeah.
But again, you want goals, don't you, really? That's what Albion had lacked, goals. And would Piazzu provide them? I wouldn't put my house on it.
Fair enough. I think that, Matt. And before we sort of wrap up our striker conversation, then we'll touch on Callum Morton in a second, but I just wanted to get from your perspective, looking ahead, are there any names that really jump out to you as sort of realistic striker targets for Albion before the window closes?
I think the main one which is being thrown about amongst Albion supporters, and has been since he left the club, is Dwight Gale. Of course, he spent a season on loan at the Hawthorns and did really well, 20 plus goals. Pretty much everything we've missed this season. He was mobile, quick across the ground, link play up really well, and of course, I said scored the goals.
Yeah.
However, the word you used there, Ned, which probably or possibly sort of rules him off the list, would be realistic. Gale's been linked with Albion. I said since he's left the club. Some believe he was close to rejoining under Slaven Bilic and turned a move down. Again, we've heard rumours, even more in recent times. I'm just not sure the money he's on at Newcastle is something Albion can provide. Whether they'd be able to split wages again is another discussion. But again, why is Gale not really got a move from Newcastle since that slow spell with Albion? Are his wages putting Championship sides off because he'd definitely be at the top of a lot of clubs' wanted lists? Not too sure we can afford to pay his wages. One more I'll quickly throw out there, which is another former Albion player, in fact, an interesting one. Maybe not everyone's favourite, but one that possibly interests me, especially in this current system under Ishmael, is Shane Long.
Yeah,
someone who, again, he's sort of on the fringes at Southampton, isn't he? And not exactly getting as much game time as I suppose he'd want. I think spent a couple of months on loan at Bournemouth, didn't he, last season? Again, didn't really set the world alight. But the one thing Albion fans will always remember of Shane Long is the energy and running that he provided when leading the line. And that's something which Ishmael would definitely favour. I'd imagine he won't be too expensive, but again, lacks the goals.
Sure. Yeah, certainly two strong options, you'd say, and players that have proven their quality at Premier League level, and if nothing else, that should excite sort of Baggies fans. It's an interesting one with Dwight Gale. I think, the Newcastle takeover would have sort of suggested we might see some movement there, but you're right. Perhaps before Daryl DK signed, the money might have been there for the wages, but it now seems a bit, tight to try and get both of their wages in. It's certainly going to be something to watch, though, that the striker situation over the next 4 days. Two strikers that are Albion players, Callum Morton, one of them. He was recalled from loan at Fleetwood, but obviously sent out to Peterborough United. Matt, do you think that's the right move for him, sort of stepping up from League One to the Championship? And do you think perhaps there's a missed opportunity for the Baggies not to have him around the squad right now?
Well, it's interesting you say that there, mate, because on our podcast, I raised the point of perhaps thinking, well, if Jordan Hugo's possibly departing, that leaves us without any sort of striker in reserve to DK. Yeah. So if Morton's deemed good enough to play at this level, then why not bring him back and add him to the squad? And he didn't lose any sort of supporters from his time at Fleetwood. I think he did fairly well. Again, we'd seen him set the world alight, really, or do really well at Northampton. He played a big part in their promotion a couple of years ago. And I think the natural progression was moving to League One. I think injury cut his time short at Lincoln City, didn't it? Which is a shame. Under Michael Appleton, a manager who knows him well. And again, he's probably one of Fleetwood's better performers, of course. It didn't really work out for them under Simon Grayson, I think it wasn't it? As Stephen Craney's coming in. As I say, I think Morton did fairly well. I haven't seen too much of him whether I can say, oh, he's not a Championship player or he's ready for the step up. I think what you can say, it's a good move. Peterborough obviously fighting for survival. He made his debut on Tuesday night against Birmingham City. So it's definitely a good move. As I'm not sure if he's completely ready for the Championship, but if Darren Ferguson and those at Peterborough deem he is, that's good enough for me. So I would possibly consider actually adding him to the squad, but let's hope he does well for the Posh.
Absolutely. Another young forward then that's been linked with a loan move this time to Sheffield Wednesday, Rayhan Tulloch. Is he someone you'd sort of like to see go out on loan, Matt?
Yeah, he is for sure. I think he was again another attacker like Morton last year, who was very unfortunate to have suffered a serious injury with Doncaster, and again, like Morton, under a manager who knew him well in Darren Moore, possibly linking, of course, back up with Moore at Sheffield Wednesday. So and there were high hopes around Tulloch. Albion have seen a lot of academy prospects depart, particularly to Aston Villa, which is a bit of a sore note, but. Tulloch was one who committed his future and impressed Slaven Bilic and a lot of people around the club then. So it was a bit of a confidence boost to see one of our hottest prospects sign a deal, and we look forward to seeing him kick on. So that injury hasn't done him any favours at Doncaster last year, and he's been back with the under-23s. So he's definitely someone I'd like to see, drop down a few leagues, get some game time, and show us why he was classed as one of our brightest prospects. Because I'm sure the talent's still there. But it's also a long road back from injury, so he could definitely do with game time in senior football. And that said, hopefully we can show, we can see, and he can show the talent that he must still have.
Moving on to potential departures, then it looks now as if Kenneth Zohore, Robert Snodgrass, that they haven't moved on yet. Looks now that they won't be moving on. Do you think that's just an indicator of what a difficult market it is at the moment to offload players, particularly for a club like West Brom, who because of their sort of yo-yoing have been able to and have spent quite a lot of money on wages in the past?
Yeah, it is a difficult market. COVID has obviously affected that massively. But in some ways, I think this is Albion's wrongdoing, particularly from a Zohore perspective. Of course, he was signed from Cardiff City, £8 million, I believe it was in total. And whilst he was part of the squad that helped us return to the Premier League initially, he hasn't contributed as much as anyone would have hoped. So you look at he's on decent wages, and we saw him. Again, was it January last year? Start of the season, perhaps. I can't quite remember. Joined Millwall on loan, and didn't exactly set the world alight. I'm just not convinced he's a great player. But and you're right, Ned. Wages will hamper his chances of getting a move elsewhere. He's also suffered an injury and has only started playing for the under-23s again in recent times. So I'd be surprised, if I'm honest, to see Zohore leave, because I'm not sure anyone would be willing to pay his wages. What does he exactly offer? It's a difficult one. In an ideal world, there would be someone out there who can take him off Albion's hands, permanently, but that'll never happen. And I really don't think there's a chance of a loan deal coming to fruition. Unfortunately, I think the same can be said for Robert Snodgrass, who fell out with Valérien Ishmael quite a few months ago now, and there's something clearly going on there. And I think it's a bit different from Zohore, because Snodgrass can offer something to a championship club. He joined Albion in our fight for survival, ultimately unsuccessful last year in the Premier League. And he didn't exactly do badly. I think he won a few admirers amongst Albion fans, and actually played a couple of games this season. He started in our 4-0 win over Bristol City, and I think Ishmael came out and said he's probably man of the match in that game.
Yeah,
something's obviously gone on there, but I'm surprised that no one's taken Snodgrass. And I know he's had a few injury issues himself, as well as not being considered for selection. But it must be, as you said, it must be a wage issue, because I'm sure someone would be willing to take him from us. We saw when he was last in the Championship with Aston Villa, I think, and he really did well. Yeah, time's passed from them, but he did well with West Ham. And a player like Robert Snodgrass, his set pieces alone would provide danger for some. So it's an interesting one. I wouldn't exactly rule out a move for him, but again, it's not looking likely, is it?
Absolutely. I'm sure a lot of Baggies fans would love to see that duo depart in the last 4 days of the window. But as we say, it looks tough. One player that, as you were talking about, Snodgrass's fallout, one player whose future has slightly been thrown into uncertainty once again, it is Sam Johnstone, the sort of England international, returned from well, he was made available after a 3-match suspension, but wasn't part of the squad against Preston last night. An internal issue, Valérien Ishmael called it. But the Athletic now reporting that was a sort of an argument, a fallout between Johnstone and the manager. Reportedly, West Ham and Southampton unlikely to move this month, given his contract situation. Just wanted to get your thoughts on the situation, Matt. Originally it looked a massive boost, really, that the Baggies were keeping hold of Johnstone, given he's, for me, the best goalkeeper in the Championship. But this is a slight worry, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a worry, and I think you've got two sides to it. You've got the worry of, as you said, the league's best goalkeeper missing out on the next. Well, I know Ishmael's come out and said he won't be playing against Millwall, so we don't really know how long this could last. Yeah. And then you've got the other side of it, and what effect has this had on the rest of the squad, on the club and the atmosphere? It's not looking too good. This could possibly play a part in the demise of Valérien Ishmael and a part in his departure. So again, it's not looking great. I mean, I remember Ned was talking at the start of the season and saying what a massive boost it was, and it really did feel like that. And then Albion enjoyed a good start to the season, and you couldn't really go wrong from there. And the hopes of possibly a new contract, but all doesn't seem well. I can only speculate what might have gone on last night, but yeah, I suppose Johnstone's immediate future would depend on our managerial situation. I think ultimately it does look like he'll be off in the summer. You could say he hasn't played to the best of his ability either, but again, I'd probably be put down to the system, and he's playing more of as a sweeper keeper, if that makes sense, being asked to clean up a lot of opposition attacks off his line. He has made errors, but I do think anyone in that situation who's not comfortable with doing that probably would be. But you're right, it's not looking good at all for Albion and Johnstone.
No, absolutely not. And he's one that is perhaps worth keeping an eye on in the final few days of the window. Well, next we're just going to move on to a couple of sort of rumoured targets, Matt, outside of that sort of striker position. One of them is Jamie Paterson, the playmaker. Obviously has seemed rejuvenated since swapping Bristol City for Swansea City, and a fantastic start to the season, but a fallout, which we're hearing is sort of due to a disagreement over a contract extension, has really put his future at Swansea in doubt. Albion said to be among the sides perhaps looking to capitalise. Is he a player you're keen on, Matt? And do you think he could be one that could sort of give a boost to this West Brom squad?
I mean, I think Jamie Paterson's a player you must know fairly well, Ned. And the way I look at it is he's probably a bit too similar to what we already have in Callum Robinson, Carlin Grant, Matt Phillips, and Grady Yangana. And you're right, he has been rejuvenated under Russell Martin, and I was surprised to have seen him do so well. He's contributed massively in attack, really efficient numbers for Swansea, and I can't imagine he'll cost a great deal if we were to bring him in January. I think his initial contract at the very least, is up at the end of the season. Then there's the dispute around an extension. I wouldn't be totally against it, because I don't think he's an awful player. However, is he what Albion need right now? I wouldn't say so.
Absolutely, you would think, given it seems to be a contract that sort of seems to be that he felt he was being undervalued perhaps at Swansea. You feel therefore that West Brom probably better spending the money that it would cost to bring Paterson in elsewhere on sort of finding some cover and competition for Daryl Dike. Just one more then, this one's slightly more left field. West Brom apparently alongside Nottingham Forest in vying to sign Rangers centre-back Connor Goldson on a pre-contract. That of course would mean that Goldson would join for free, but in the summer at the end of his current deal at Ibrox. Do you think he's a player, Matt, that could succeed at the Hawthorns? Is centre-back from the summer onwards a position you think needs work? What are your sort of thoughts on this one?
Funnily enough, Connor Goldson has been linked to Albion for quite a few years now. I'm not sure whether those links were concrete or they had any sort of there were realistic links, but I'm not sure he's a player again that Albion desperately need. But equally, he's certainly won plaudits at Rangers, and I don't think he'd be a downgrade at all. I mean, let's say again, hypothetically, Matt Clark departed from his loan spell at the end of the season. Albion need a left-sided centre-back. I believe Goldson is left-footed. You could do a lot worse. He's definitely done well at Rangers, as I said. Obviously, would have gained experience coming through, with Brighton, for example. So wouldn't be a bad player. It's just a case of that priority in the striker role takes over everything else. Say again, if we were to sort of rebuild the squad in the summer, he'd certainly be someone I'd be interested in. In all fairness, again, hypothetically, if Albion announced tomorrow that we'd agreed a pre-contract deal for Connor Galton, I certainly wouldn't be unhappy. So maybe it's one to keep an eye on. I think his family actually originate from the West Midlands. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I said he's been rumoured for a while. Was he close to joining in previous years? I'm not too sure. But I wouldn't totally be against that. It's the striker role, which obviously takes precedence though, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we wrap up then, Matt, and I'll ask you in a second sort of how you feel, what you feel needs to be done in the final 4 days of the window, and a sort of, what an ideal finish to the window would be. But I guess it would be wrong of us really not to talk about Valérien Ishmael. I think you, Matt, I've found it. I've always been fairly level-headed and a defender of him when there've been other Albion fans were already calling for his head at other points. But I sense now perhaps your stance has shifted a bit. Do you really expect to see the manager leave soon? And do you think that it's the right decision to sort of look to change things? You've
summed up my position on Ishmael brilliantly there, Ned. Especially with the turnover of staff Albion have had in recent years, I really like to give the manager a chance and let him make mistakes. Of course, everything's not going to be rosy, but it's getting tough now, and I don't think you can defend him anymore. I honestly, it's got to a point now, and it's important to mention this group of players have to take a whole deal of responsibility, because for numerous managers in the past, they've down tools and ended up with the manager paying the price. But there's certain aspects of Valérien Ishmael's football which Albion fans will never take to. I made the point of saying previously he might not be a bad manager in his own right. However, is he the right fit for Albion? I don't think he is. Last night against Preston was a disgrace. Like I said, the players take a responsibility for that, but it's aspects like his lack of flexibility, stubbornness. Some would possibly describe it as arrogance. I think he's lost the group of players. He's certainly lost the fans. There's a chance of Slaven Bilic going around last night, which definitely made a few chuckle. And as well as anyone, Ned, and for any club, once a manager loses the fans like that and the stadium turns toxic, can you come back from that? Can I see Valérien Ishmael turning it round? No, I can't, and therefore I would like to see him leave the club. And then where do we go from there? It's an interesting one. I'm not sure, but I think it's a case now where you've got to cut his losses because it's not getting any better, I don't think. Whether I think he will leave is another question. There are again, I don't want to come on here and spark rumours and say I've heard this, I've heard that. There are individuals on social media who believe they're well connected with the club that are stating he's been sacked already. Again, take those with a pinch of salt, obviously. He's on a 4-year contract. It'll be a big payoff. And I think we all know Albion's owners don't like spending money. It's a difficult situation because you don't want to end up in a situation like we did with Alan Pardew, where it's the right decision to give the manager the boot, but you can't afford it. And then results are still poor. And, it's a horrible situation. So, yeah, we'll just have to wait and see, I suppose, with Ishmael.
Absolutely. And just onto the final question then before we wrap up. I guess really, given there's so few days left of the window, whether it's Ishmael or another manager, sort of it doesn't change what the top priority has to be, does it?
No, not at all. I think from Albi's perspective, they need a striker, don't they? Because Jordan Hugo, at this rate, looks to have no future at the club, and that leaves us without a striker with DK's injury. Anyone can recognise they need a striker. That has to be the priority now, in the short term at least. And of course, from then, you'd look to get as many fringe players out the door as possible, and perhaps try to recuperate that additional money you spent on bringing in that striker, which wasn't foreseen at the start of the window. Who knows, Ned? A lot could happen in these next 4 days. So strap yourselves in. It might be a bit of a roller coaster ride.
Absolutely, that certainly looks set to be a busy few days, and perhaps, hopefully, for the good of West Brom, perhaps the championship title race. You'd hope that the Baggies do get a striker through the door. Well, that is everything from us on the West Brom fan debate today. We've got 2 more shows on Football League World TV this afternoon at 2:30. It's the debate on the 3 EFL clubs that have 4 days to save their January window with George Douglas and Toby Wilding. Probably a few Baggies fans that feel that they could feature on that list. And then at 4 p.m, it's the EFL Transfer Zone with Chris Gallagher, Billy Mully and Ben Wignall as your hosts. That just leaves me to say thanks everyone for watching, and thank you very much, Matt.